Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan and myself are going to go over some of our recent updates. We're going to talk a little bit about our favorite rear delt exercises, and then the majority of the episode will be discussing Bryan's upcoming specialization cycle for hamstrings, I believe, Bryan, if I'm not mistaken. But let's get into our updates, and then we'll jump into all that. So what's going on?
So I'm officially on the end of my strength cycle now. I just deemed it done, essentially. I've been having a lot of fatigue, and this is like now the fourth or fifth week in a row that I talked about it. And so now with a little bit of distance between, my first experience of this accumulated fatigue and then kind of now. I've realized a few things, and I think it has mostly come down to going too heavy on the deadlift too early in the cycle. And it's something I probably should. I don't know if I should have known better. Like, I was going off of subjective RPE. It's just when I pull a RPE 7 on the deadlift, I think that the way that it taxes my system is as if I went to like a 10 on like 7 other movements or something like that. Like one rep at a 7 is really hard. And then in prior weeks, we had discussed kind of that subsequent mistake I made where I pulled the really fast 460 and I was like, this is the best ever. I pulled 460 and it flew up. And then 4 days later, I went and like PR'd my 6 rep RDL. And then since that point, it's all been downhill. I don't think I've deadlifted a single actual session as it was scripted in my program since that 460 and then the RDL sequence. And on top of that, my sleep has just been completely awful the last 2 weeks, like literally 10 to 14 days. It's been terrible. And it makes me think about the chicken and the egg thing of is the sleep a result of this fatigue that I've caused myself from the deadlifting and from the strength cycle? Or is my strength cycle suffering because my sleep is bad? And it's probably a little bit of both, to be honest, but I have a feeling just because the sleep thing was so sudden and so weird, and it's kind of started, a week or two after all of that mess with the deadlifts, that I kind of think I just did it to myself, and the deadlift thing just took too much out of me. And essentially the way that it's affecting me is that I've always been someone that wakes up in the middle of the night when I sleep. I can't remember the last time I slept 8 hours from beginning to end without waking up. Like I was probably in high school. And so I always wake up once or twice, but I'll like stumble to the bathroom, I go pee, I stumble back to bed, and I'm back asleep within 2 minutes. It's not a big deal. Now what's happening is I'm waking up 3 to 6 times a night, and my temperature is always off. I'm either hot or I'm too cold, usually hot and then cold. And then I can't fall back asleep because I'm like bothered by the temperature. I don't want to move and wake Kim up. I have things on my mind, like whatever it is. And if I wake up after 3:30, I'm just up for the day. Like there's no way after 3:30 that I'm able to go back to bed. So these are all like really odd things for me. And there isn't anything else going on in my life that would make me think that that it would be a problem that I could relate it to. So I really just kind of relate it back to the deadlifts thing, and I wonder if it's just too much. Like maybe it's not even like the physical toll, but I can't get out of my head this psychological arousal piece and how much that plays a role and how much it affects me. And so like yesterday, as I was gonna go test my one rep, as I decided I wanted to do potentially at the end of this cycle, I had to get like pretty aroused up just to do 365, which moved really well. And then I was like getting myself aroused up and was like, okay, like 405 RPE 7, this is my goal, like let's do this. And I like got aroused up and I unracked the bar and I was just like, no, fuck this. And I re-racked it again and I was like, I don't need it. I was like, I'm at a place in my life where I'm like slightly discontent and slightly disappointed in myself for A, messing the cycle up potentially, and B, not seeing it through. But then there's another side of me that's like really proud of myself for knowing that I'm in this state of fatigue and that, continuing to push further wouldn't be a prudent move and could potentially put me even further down the hole. So I have a bit of a balance of emotions here when it comes to the ending of this strength cycle, but I definitely learned some stuff, and I think that at a minimum, I realized that before all this fatigue hit me, that I had already matched the strength numbers that I wanted. Like, I squatted 385, 390, 395, and they all moved very well and quickly. And I pulled a 460 deadlift that was the easiest 460 I ever pulled. And these are all in comparison to where I was 5 years ago, and at a body weight that was close to 210 pounds. And now I'm in the low 190s. So I'm about 15 pounds less and still moving the same weights that I was then. So I think eventually I'll probably attack another strength cycle in a year or so, and I will have learned a lot as far as what I can do and can't do in regards to deadlifts specifically. But overall, I'd call it a success, and really excited to move into hypertrophy. And I have a lot to discuss as far as that goes in the episode as we continue. But that would kind of be the culminate or the final thoughts that I have on the 7 weeks of the strength cycle.
Okay. So I have a world of questions.
Yes.
From what you just brought up. So I'd say that the most interesting thing to me is that you still like, I don't want to say interesting, impressive, I guess. Maybe impressive, maybe also a little bit potentially negligent. That you still continue to try and progress it with the very obviously poor sleep. It's so, I mean, that's kind of tying it back to, we bring up this phrase a lot, but like hypertrophy is such a forgiving adaptation, right? When your sleep's down and you're not feeling so great, you can just reduce load. You reduce load, you still take it to like a similar RIR. You can maybe change out movements to more stimulative, less fatiguing movements. When you're trying to get strong in a back squat, you can't be like, all right, I'm just going to do leg extension, a little bit more today, or like a rear foot elevated split squat. Like, no, you need to back squat in match, intensities and type of thing. So the glaring thing to me is like, what is going on with the sleep? So if it truly is like, business is good, relationships are good, all these other kind of maybe emotional, seemingly less obvious aspects of your life, you're checking the box there. There's a reason sleep is tanked. The temperature thing is a big one. So that one could be a little bit harder to control. I don't know Kim's standpoint, type of thing. I kind of will put my foot down and be like, I'm putting the AC at 65. Like, that's what I'm going to do type of deal. He might lose that battle. Fortunately, I've won it. There is something called a chili pad where you kind of, and you can do it on like, individual sides of the bed. So that could be something. I just know that like I'm a very temperature sensitive sleeper. If it gets too hot, like I just can't fucking sleep. I'm miserable. So I like it, and I sleep really, really well when it's cold. I just know this. And there is some research to back that. So that's one thing you could look at. Another thing, what I would recommend, and this is what I will generally do with clients, like if people are sleeping like really, really poorly, and it could be maybe work stress is like really, really picked up or something like that, or training, I'm going to come in and just kind of hit them pretty hard with adaptogens. So like an ashwagandha, specifically I use this product from New Ethics called Court Ease. It's kind of like a little bit of like a sledgehammer approach, but I'll do that. And then they also have a product called Liposomal Relax. And that is like the 1-2 sleep combination. Like I've used that with multiple clients myself and people have like reported like I've never slept so good in my entire life. And it's different than like a Robitussin type sleep or, something like that where it just like knocks you down, but you feel like you're drooling all over yourself and that type of shit. So it's definitely just like a restful sleep. So that's something that we can talk about off air, because at this point you just want to restore sleep. And if you need something to bridge a gap for a month until you can kind of figure it out, by all means, I think that would be very, very beneficial for you personally there.
Real quick, let me just jump in before you cover everything. Temperature. So usually the temperature isn't an issue for me because I do keep the house at like 67 or 68 at night, and that's pretty good for me. This temperature thing is just since the sleep has been disrupted. So it's again like a sign of like maybe something being disrupted internally with like my hormone function or something along those lines. Do you have a thought on that or?
No, I mean that's
okay.
It
good. Makes sense.
That's probably not that type of thing. The other thing is when you said like I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and then I'm just like up. that is oftentimes early cortisol peaking, because cortisol is what wakes us up, right? It slowly begins to rise throughout the night. It reaches a threshold where our body, wakes up, type of thing. And that's another one. When clients will report to me, I'm waking up at like 4 a.m. and I'm just like wired and up. It's generally like your cortisol is peaking earlier. So it could be training induced, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because generally it's not as common in a lot of people where it is like just training. It's usually like, oh, it's, quarter end at work and I'm getting my fucking dick pushed into the ground with, workload. I'm having, relationship. It's generally like a few things kind of peaking at once where people's stress is building. It could also be a couple other factors, right? So we know that like melatonin is like counter-regulatory with cortisol. So something might be going on. Maybe you're just like, maybe your screen time is creeping into the evening or something like that, where your natural melatonin production is not, where it used to be before. It could also be testosterone regulated too, because testosterone is another, it works opposite of cortisol as well. So, I mean, you could take a 4-point cortisol saliva test if you wanted to do that and see really what's going on with that curve. But I would go the opposite routes first before going down the testing, because it could be, hey, maybe stress has just peaked a lot from the strength training phase or block. And if you can kind of bridge that with some like ashwagandha and adaptogens and some, what's the word I'm looking for? Herbal kind of sleep help for like 3 weeks to 4 weeks to get you restored again, and then where things will kind of level out on their own. That's probably what I would do first before moving into testing.
Yeah, what's interesting about it though is that like the sleep thing is just like the last 3 or 4 hours of my sleep cycle. So I fall asleep so easily and so hard at like 8:30. I literally am just sitting there watching TV, and then I'm out, and the next thing I know it's 12:30 and I'm just up going pee, and I'm like, where did the last 4 hours go? And I'm in the exact same position that I fell asleep in. So I'm getting like some really, really high quality sleep in like the first 4 hours, and then I think it's like that back half that I'm struggling with. So maybe that is like some early cortisol and stuff like that too. But yeah. I mean, it does, from what I can tell, like it seems like I induced this on myself from the training thing, because I always like 1 to 2 times a night, like right back to sleep. Like whenever I'm training hypertrophy, that's just the way it is. Like, mitigating outside stresses, like you mentioned, like lifestyle things. But when it comes to just training, like I just sleep well if I'm doing hypertrophy work. So there's something about what I did to myself within the stimulus of this specific cycle that I think has had that impact on me. And I guess it's just something to learn from and know that a 460 deadlift, even if it moves fast, is significantly more fatiguing than I think it is. So maybe, I'm staying at 405 instead of 460, and then I'm doing my back off sets at like 330 instead of at 405, So things like that could go a long way, I think, in preserving me going forward.
It could have been one of those things where like physically you are capable of moving those weights, but your body was not necessarily prepared for that intensity at that kind of frequency that quickly, right? So
yeah, the frequency is a huge one.
This was like one of my notes this week. I did a gnarly hike with one of my clients on Sunday. It was like basically like rock scrambling. Like it was like a 2,700 foot elevation change.
Oh yeah, I saw those pictures.
And like physically I could do it, and then later that day my body was like, yo, we are not okay. Like what the hell did you just do? Because I'm not in like that type of like shape to be doing that type of stuff. So they could be one of those things like where that's the benefit of, like this style of training and, how active and stuff we are, is like you are physically capable, but you may not be actually like prepared for the repercussions of what comes from performing that, capability type of thing.
It's like the downstream effect on the nervous system. Yeah, because that's the way it feels to me. Like I feel like this... Yeah, it feels cortisol-y. Like it kind of, that like nervy feeling where you're just like kind of like extra alert for no reason kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a weird feeling, but I feel like that I feel like that happened. So it's all very interesting, and ultimately I'm just really glad to be moving on and going back into hypertrophy work. And did I mention that Did I tell you? I can't remember if I told you yet that I signed up for the N1 practical next week. I did, right?
Yeah, but it's like the week
Yeah.
after the one.
Yeah,
that
the week after
I
you're
leave
doing
tomorrow.
it. Yeah. So Aaron's doing the N1 practical this week, and we're gonna grab dinner and hang out a little bit while he's in town. And then the very next week, I'm gonna be doing the practical too. So it's wild that N1 has them in back-to-back weeks. But you also have an NCI event.
Yeah. So and then so I guess the week you're at N1, we come back
Okay.
and then have like 3 days, back to normalcy and work. And then there's an NCI, which is Nutrition Coaching Institute, and Jason Phillips here in Scottsdale. And we're like, we're already here. Why not go and do some networking and learn stuff? So I'm excited for that too. So I mean, anyone who's on the podcast listening, if you'll be in town for that, and you want to maybe get some coffee, lift some weights, send me a message on Instagram, and we will do that.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Speaking of sleep, right, I have a little bit of a sleep update. So I've kind of like in the back of my mind, back of hand, kind of known this, but I really solidified it this week, and I purposefully attempted it again last night just to see if it was like a fluke or not. I am someone that just like does not, I don't know if metabolize is necessarily the correct word, but metabolize melatonin well. Like I'll take melatonin and I am like groggy as shit in the morning and like do not want to get out of bed. And that is very, very uncharacteristic of me. So I'm like one of those people like 6:15, 6:30, I'm like up, popped out of bed, ready to go, like excited for the day. And the last 2 days I took melatonin because on Sunday I wanted to go to bed super early because I was so beat up from that hike. Mm-hmm. So I took it, and then yesterday, I think I slept till like 8 yesterday, which I mean, that's an hour, that's 90 to 100 minutes longer than I normally sleep. And I went to bed earlier. And then last night I did it again. And so I've been, putting my money where my mouth is. I keep my phone plugged in and charged in the kitchen, right? Not in the bedroom. I got up this morning, went and walked to the kitchen, turned my phone alarm off, and then fucking went back to bed. And that's like, it's like commitment to do that, to get up and go.
College hungover actions right there.
Yeah, and I was just like, and then even just like brushing my teeth, I was like, I'm still like 80% asleep, but I need to get up and start the day. And I'm only taking 5 milligrams. There are some times where you can find it in like 2.5 milligram increments. Jenny's like the complete opposite. She's perfectly fine with it, but I just do not do very well with it. It like will slog me kind of a little bit.
So I hate it. I used it maybe 3 or 4 times in my life. And by the way, they do have 1 milligram, 3 milligram, 5 milligram. Like you can get it whatever size you want.
Yeah.
I always found that each of the 3 or 4 times I took it, I had like a weird outer body experience where I felt like I was watching myself sleep. And it just like, it was odd. Like I would wake up groggy just like you, and I never felt like I had like super restful sleep with it. So I don't do it anymore.
Yeah. What's really interesting is I've seen some studies where I think they will, man, I really wish I could remember specifically. They'll use high doses of melatonin to counteract cortisol. And I remember, I wish I could remember, I think upwards of like 100 milligrams. And I was like, whoa, I'm like 100 milligrams of melatonin would put me into the eternal sleep. Like I would not wake up.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, and just kind of goes to show like there's so much individual variability in person to person with different things. There was something I saw from Dr. Ben House this morning on LDL levels and dietary intake and stuff like that, and it was getting a little bit heated because people obviously have differing opinions, but it was one of those things. It's like it's gonna be person to person dependent, kind of like my experiment, right? I dropped my carbs, went high fat, and my glucose and HbA1c got worse, and my LDL went up considerably by almost probably like 30%, 40%, which is pretty wild. Or no, almost 50. I'm not the best at math. And then I guess the last thing for me, update that I have, is Jenny and I are doing this thing where, as we're both nutrition coaches, obviously, a lot of people will struggle with like meals out, restaurant meals and type of things. So we're doing this thing we call the date night series. So we're going to do like 8 to 10 different types of restaurants, and then break down like these are the types of things you want to order. This is the reasons why. We generally will, avoid these types of things just to provide, for clients and stuff like that, like really turnkey options. And so they can feel very empowered with their decisions and not feel like they can't participate in stuff and just know like, hey, in these situations, this is exactly what we will do type of deal. So I'm excited for that. And then it, gives us a reason to go on dates, but there's still work dates, I suppose. But
yeah, no, that's a great idea. That's I think that's going to be very helpful for people too. Is this going to go on YouTube?
Probably not.
Okay.
That's a
Instagram.
That's a lot of extra work.
Yeah. I was just curious how involved this is going to be, like super professional production, like camera following you around, like as you enter the restaurant.
I'm not ready for that level of anxiety in public with a camera following me.
Totally. Yeah, no, I feel that. Okay, cool. Sweet. Well, should we jump into program design?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Oh, and there's a note here that says Kiwis are great.
Yeah, I did have
that's from your updates.
I did have
Tell
a note,
me about it.
Yeah, it was, man. So obviously you would have them, and then when we were planning obviously we were like getting shit for our drive down, and I just saw the kiwis, and I'm like, Brian loves the kiwis. I'm just gonna buy them. Like, I think maybe I had them once in my life or whatever, and I've just been buying them, and like I really really enjoy them. And there's also too they're higher in fiber when you eat the skin, and that it's like a little bit of a, like, I know I should get this because of the fiber. So it is, there's more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not like, there's a higher inclination to get it because I know it's better for me type of thing. I'm like, oh, I can get fiber here too. So, but yeah, I have probably 2 of them a day. And now I've been experimenting with like the golden kiwis, and there are these like red type Johns where they're a little different, but they're just fantastic. So I've definitely become a fan. So thank you for kind of just influencing me to start eating kiwis.
Absolutely, they're my first or second favorite fruit, and they have been for 20 years. Them and cherries. Cherries are really good. They're just only around for a few months a year.
Yeah, yes, cherries in the summer is it is a treat for sure.
Yep. All right, sweet. Let's talk program design. So, if you guys have not yet listened to the episode from last week with Cassim Hansen, I highly suggest that because I decided to take the opportunity to ask him a personal question at the end of our podcast episode about kind of some specialization factors that I could consider when designing my new cycle. So just in case anyone hasn't kept up on the saga of our lives for the last 46 episodes, I went to Fort Collins a couple months ago, met with Brian Miner, Alberto Nunez. They told me that I look pretty good, but my hamstrings suck for what we can tell at this moment. And they suggested I design like an off season where I basically just prioritize hamstrings for basically a year or so. Which is cool because I actually like training hamstrings, which is kind of surprising that they're not good because usually the things you enjoy training are pretty solid. But I've been kind of racking my brain with different ways to design this thing. And then when I posed that question to Cassim, he said something that I hadn't considered yet. And he had 3 suggestions, and I'll go over those real quick. One of them was volume ramping. So this is kind of like what Dr. Mike uses with RP, where you start a mesocycle at a lower number of sets, and then over the course of the mesocycle, you add sets so that at the end, you're essentially at your MRV, maximum recoverable volume. And that's one thing I didn't consider because it is a great idea because the main mitigating factor I'm having in my program design is that my hamstrings get really sore. But we know that via the repeated bout effect, that as you do things in subsequent weeks, you'll get less sore, which means that I could potentially add sets and achieve the same or maybe even less soreness than I did the prior week. So I really like that volume ramping idea. Cassim also had an idea of potentially having one day that's more mechanically damaging. So this would be things like RDLs and good mornings, hip extensions potentially, and then have another day that's more like short overload focused. So it would be like more leg curls. I'd probably break out like single leg curls and use the cable machine and stuff like that. Have a few variations in there. And maybe could even put hip extensions on that day as well, where I would potentially bias the top position of the movement instead of biasing like the stretch or the lengthen position. So that's something that I am also considering along with volume ramping. Yes, hand up. How can I help you?
How would you bias in hip extension the opposite?
So essentially, you just wouldn't go to the top position. You would go deep into the stretch at the bottom, and then you would come up maybe like 2/3, 3/4 of the way, and you wouldn't actually when you cross the horizontal plane of the world, right, where your body crosses horizontal, that's where we really get into that like short overload limitation. So I would probably just take it up until about horizontal and then reverse direction and go back down again.
That is kind of what I inherently do with them. The hip extension to me is just like, it's this fascinating movement because there's so, like, you can change it with these little tweaks. And like, something I'll do is if I bend my knees, if I don't like lock my knees out, I'll like keep them, not like broke, but like I'll have a break in my knee. I won't
I know what you
lock
mean.
them
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
It completely changes like the stimulus and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know. It's so, I feel like there could be this incredible video of someone showing the like 7 different ways that you can use the hip extension for like glutes and hamstrings and the nuance between them. It's just fantastic. I feel like it's super underutilized.
Totally. No, and I'm still down because I got the stupid hip extension machine without the calf pads. So I have it now like stuffed in my furnace room because there's no room for it in my gym.
I saw that.
But I am going to use it in this hamstring specialization. I'm just not exactly sure how much load I can handle. So one of the things I put on my story the other day was that I found that when you begin to ascend out of the hip extension, if you slam your quads into the pad, kind of like what you were saying, like almost slightly bending the knee instead of squeezing the glutes to ascend, then it's significantly harder. I mean, way, way, way harder. When I contract my glutes, I can do 12 reps with 85 pounds in each hand, so 170 pounds. And when I was doing the way where you just kind of slam your quads in and you don't squeeze the glutes, I was using half of that weight for less reps. I think that, as far as stimulus to fatigue goes, and as far as like specifically for the hamstring, that shit makes way more sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did them that way on Friday, and I used one 40-pound dumbbell, and I was feeling around 8, 9.
Yeah. So I think, like, to your point, man, the hip extension has so many different ways, like so much utility, and I would love that if someone would make a post on that. Like, maybe I'll at some point gather my thoughts on it. I don't know if I know enough. I need to experiment with it more before I do something like that, but that would be a great post for Cass or Paul Carter or something like that.
Yeah.
So those are 2 of the ways, the one day with the mechanical tension focus and the stretch, and then one day with short overload focus, the potential idea of volume ramping. And then Cass's third idea, which I also had never really thought of, was, what if you just don't even worry about frequency and you just like go destroy your hamstrings, like go do like, 8, 12, 15 sets or whatever it is, and just expect that you're going to be sore as fuck for like a week. And then when you're not sore anymore, you just go train them again. And that's a very like sledgehammer approach to the situation, but it's something I haven't tried. Like, I've actually really been trying to manipulate frequency. I'm like, how can I get more frequency in? Because that's what my hamstrings need, is more frequency. Maybe they don't need more frequency. Maybe they just need more recovery. Which also brings me to a point that Brian Miner made when I was up in Fort Collins when he was talking about this, because I posed the same question to him of like, hey, my hamstrings get really sore. Like, what should I do about this? And his response was like, maybe you just extra recover by doing less in the rest of your body. So you do less upper body, you maybe do less quads, and then that opens up all this recovery currency that you can use for your hamstrings. So I think kind of the idea of combining all of these approaches, like kind of some of the ideas that Cassim threw out with kind of what Brian was saying, I've begun to kind of construct a cycle in my head. And so I can go over that in a second. Do you have any thoughts or questions before I do?
Yeah, one thing I thought of that just kind of popped into my head, another thing is you could even just eat more on your hamstring specific day to throw extra recovery currency at it, especially as you're going through this transition where you need to fix your sleep a little bit too, because those are our 2 primary recovery pathways, sleep and calories, right? So if you're suffering in one department, you can kind of bolster in another.
Yeah, my body weight is pretty stable right now, slightly climbing, so I think that I'm in a surplus, but I guess I could always like hammer that a little bit harder.
But also the sleep too, like your sleep's been poor for 14 days, that will skew things. I don't want to say negatively, but north.
Right. No, that's a good point. Okay, cool. So what I have right now, and this is subject to change, I should also say before I do that, because I'm going to N1 on December 9th through the 12th, I'm probably not actually going to officially start this off-season cycle until I get back from N1, because I feel like there's just going to be a bunch of like random shit thrown at me and like do pendulum squats, do RDLs, do leg curls. Like it doesn't really make sense. So probably going to just kind of have a 1.5-ish, I guess now it's 2 weeks. It would be 2 weeks of like lower key, kind of focusing on mostly cable movements and just kind of trying to flush some of this fatigue out of my system. And I think that it'll actually be good for me to have 10 days before I go to N1 and then 2 weeks before I start my new training cycle, instead of trying to jump into it this next week.
Smart.
Okay, cool. So the way I have it designed right now is that there's a full leg day on the first day, and it's a hamstring priority, which means the hamstring movements are done first. I currently have it where it's not just a mechanical tension day. So I have like one short movement and one stretch movement on that day. And then I have a second day where I also have like a stretch and a short movement on there. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it that way just because I don't know. The volume ramping is the main tool I want to use. And then I think that depending on how that goes, I may adjust some of the other tools. But initially I want to try the volume ramping with like evenly split days and see how my body handles that and see if I can keep frequency at twice a week. So anyway, that's my little intro there. So the first day is a leg day. Second day is a chest back day, but it's lower volume and it's only 2 movements for each area. So it's going to be a day where I can really get a lot of recovery because that day's not like a full workout day, and then the next day's a rest day. So I think that should give me a lot of kind of bang for my buck as far as like recovering the hamstrings, etc., leading into the next day. So then after the rest day, I have a day that's shoulders and hamstrings. So I'm doing the hamstring stuff first and then shoulders second. And then the day after that is a quads, abs, and calves day. So I have legs in back-to-back days, but I'm doing the hamstring stuff first after a rest day. So I'll have more energy to put into the hamstring stuff. Follow that up with a quad day, and then I threw the abs and calves on there because that's probably the only way to ensure that I do them is to like put a day that has them on it with quads instead of it being like legs plus abs and calves, because then I would never do it. And then there's another rest day after that leg day, quad day, and then I have a full upper body day. And the full upper body day again is going to be 5 exercises. So it's barely going to cover the whole body. There's going to be some arm stuff in there. And essentially the whole idea of this is doing less for my upper body. So I have like that chest and back day, then I have shoulders thrown in on a hamstring day, and then I have a full upper body day. So none of these upper body days should be super taxing to the upper body, which should allow the 3 leg days that I have to really kind of do their job. And the other tangential benefit that I'm thinking about this is my quads are still not like a strong point. Like they're better than my hamstrings potentially, but this also gets me 2 quad days a week, and it gives me a day where I'm just focusing on quads, which is also a benefit.
I like the splitting of the quads and the hamstrings. That's something that I want to try in the future, because I feel like I preferentially like my quads are my goal, by one, I guess, because I can see them and you can't really see your hamstrings. But they're hard to train in the same day because they're just such big muscle groups, and the movements are generally just kind of harder. You know what I mean? Like doing like a hack squat and then you're like, oh fuck, I have RDLs now. Like it's just a lot, So I do like that, splitting it up. The question I have for you is how many total days? And like, is this like a 9-day cycle, 10-day cycle?
So it's actually 5 training days, and it's written over a 7-day week, but I think that more than likely it's going to turn into an 8-day week. I'm going to do everything I can not to let it turn into a 9 or a 10 unless life happens, and then I'm okay with that. But I think over 8 days would be great, because that would be 5 training days and 3 rest days. So it's both legs. It's quads, hams, then it's chest, back, then it's rest. Then it's hams and shoulders, then it's quads and abs, calves, then it's rest, then it's full body. So it's possible that I go like on the return trip, I might go like full body, legs, rest. So the rest days might switch each week, depending, because I kind of like the 2 on 1 off, 2 on 1 off kind of thing. So if I have 5 sessions, then that might just like naturally fall into that rotation.
Yeah. I really like that. And I mean, this is one of the, I would say one of the biggest things I picked up from you this year that I really, really like is the non-calendar week training week. It's just like, it just makes things so much more flexible and realistic for life. So and I think this is something that a lot of people still aren't doing, but it's like, oh, well, I could only train, 3 days this week, and now I don't know which days to skip, or should I make them up type of thing.
Right.
People get like so like analysis paralysis by it. And now I'm just like, oh, I only trained three days. Like I was looking at my calendar this week. Like I haven't really lifted weights that many times in November. Yeah. And I was like, like the majority of the weeks I've only been in the gym 3 days.
Right.
And that's very historically low for me. But I was just like, it's just better, because in the past I would go in and like half-ass a workout. And I'd be like, oh, I got 30 minutes. Let me just do some shit and check the box. Where now I'm like, no, I'm just going to rest. And when I have the time and, the day I come in and I hit it right. And I think ultimately that latter is the best approach. And it's just like, I really like that, and I'm kind of saying thanks for, pushing that on to me. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, for sure. I have an interesting podcast reference about this too. So shout out Cody Boom Boom. He had Chris Barakat on the other day, and Barakat just got his pro card after like 10 years of trying, which is really cool. And he really brought like an incredible package, didn't lose any muscle on the dieting down and stuff like that. And so he was on Cody's podcast, and this is one of the things he was saying regarding the calendar week stuff is he was like, one of the biggest changes that I made in my prep this year is that instead of being rigidly stuck to like, I have to train on these days, he's like, I honestly could care less whether my microcycle took me 6-7 days or 10 days. He's like, my main priority was that I would be mentally and physically ready to attack the weights and force my body to hold on to as much muscle as possible. And I can't do that if I'm going into a session when I'm not as mentally focused or physically prepared as I need to be. So I will always, take that extra day or 2 days or whatever it is to make sure that my mind is where it needs to be going into that session. And I think that just kind of puts a bow on that whole idea of like, it's the effort that you put in that's going to give you the result. And if you go into that session just because it's on your calendar and you're like, I have to do this almost like a chore, then you might not be giving that session everything that you should be giving it.
Yeah, it's like what's the saying? More isn't better. Better is better.
Better. Yeah, better's better. Yeah, exactly. So that's cool. I'm really glad that was helpful for you. And you're not going to lose muscle. Like you're training 3 times a week. Like I've been training 3 times a week for 8 weeks now. I don't think I've lost muscle. It's wild how easy it is to maintain it and how neurotic people get thinking that they need to train a certain amount.
Yeah, and I'm 100% super guilty of the latter for many, many years, because it's just like I knew that the high volume worked for me, and I thought I needed it, but no, I really don't. And now, since, I don't want to talk too much about my diet, but we've shifted to basically higher carb again to get my my LDL back down and my improve my my glucose and stuff, and my weight's like up a little bit, so now I'm usually in the like 192s, 193s, but I still look like I'm basically like the best I ever have, and I'm training pretty much, I feel very confident saying like the least I ever have in 18 years.
Physique's a recovery game, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Well, do you want to move on to like our topic for the day, so to speak?
Yeah, talk about some rear delts.
Cool. Yeah, so we actually have a question as well that we could address potentially at the end. But so this ties into another thing I wanted to talk about, which was kind of some of the variation and cool stuff that you can do with cables, especially with a functional trainer like I have now, where you have dual cables.
It's a game changer. It's a game changer.
Shantae, the movement maestro, we love her on this show. She really helped me, get my heel healed up. I like what I did there. But for an update for anyone, the heel is like 90% better now. So life's back to normal, and I appreciate Shantae's help in flossing my nerves and all those fun things. But she posed a question to me, and she actually requested me to do a post on this, and I figured that it might be more fun for us to talk about it on the podcast, because then we can kind of have some back and forth and provide a little more deeper context than we can if it's just an Instagram post. But she asked what our favorite exercises are for rear delts, or I think we could even take it in the direction of just like a thorough analysis of different movements that you can do for the rear delts. And then I think that it also really is enhanced by the ability to use cables, which is something that Kasim was talking about on, oh man, it was either Abel's or Dave McConey's podcast. I listened to him on both of those recently. But on one of those, he was talking about how there's so much variation you can do with the upper body because we have limbs and opposable thumbs, and we can like, you know, move across our body and like train the torso, right? But he was like, with your legs, you don't have that freedom. Like even with a cable machine like that, like you're not going to take your leg and like take it across your body because there's no like torso in the middle for you to train. Like you kind of just can't, you can't grab things with your legs, right? So leg training in its nature, it almost like it has to be planted on the ground or in a machine to stabilize, right? Whereas with cables in our upper body, we can put our body into different positions and use the cables to then train different positions and really get like super acute with the target stimulus. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think that as we get into rear delt movements, like there's good ones that you can do with free weights and bands and things like that, and then there's like really, really good ones you can do with cables. So I think almost like separating those out into two categories is important.
Yeah, because it changes your load distribution too, and how equally distributed that load is. I mean, it's going to be variable with something like a band, very variable with something like a dumbbell, or when you move to the cable, you have that pretty much equal resistance curve throughout the movement, which is just very beneficial.
Yeah, so the main problem we're going to experience with rear delts when we're using free weights is that they're all going to be short overload. It's going to be very difficult to train the rear delts in a lengthened overload position. It's actually even kind of challenging with cables because to get a lengthened overload on the rear delt, you kind of have to come like across the body. It's almost like the inverted of the cast press around. It's like the finished position of the cast press around is how you would stretch the rear delt if it was pulling you in the opposite direction. And then you would kind of pull back and down to train that rear delt lengthened, which I actually just learned recently and I've never tried it. So I think that it would be kind of like a cool movement to experience. But cables also provide you even beyond the ability to do a overload in the stretch position. It also provides you an even tension curve so that you have some resistance in the stretch position, even if you're doing just like a typical like cable crossover raise where, you know, you have the crossover cables and you're pulling out or whatever. There is tension at the stretch position, whereas when you have dumbbells and you're bent over or you're prone on a bench or whatever it is, at that bottom position, there is no tension on the rear delt. So I think that that's an important kind of caveat to state as well.
It's super important because it's like the dumbbell kickback, right? For the first 90 degrees of that movement, you have zero, well, probably not zero, but you have incredibly little tension on the tricep because the dumbbell is just hanging off your musculature not even your musculature, your skeletal system.
Right.
So yeah, it's one of those things. It's like once you learn these concepts, like it will like revolutionize how you think about certain movements.
Yeah. So one thing I used to think for many years, and I think this was a result of bodybuilding in the 90s and early 2000s, where the name rear delt fly, you almost just kind of assumed that it was the reverse of the pec fly. So you would kind of perform it the same way. Like you would either bend over or you would lay down and you would bring your arms out to the side in that like, bent over position. And that was what was called a rear delt fly. So for many, many, many years, that's the way I performed it. And it wasn't until really kind of the stuff with N1 and Kasim where I realized that when the arms come straight out to the side like that in a bent over position, we're going to be getting a lot more of that rhomboid structure. So it's going to be like mid traps, some upper traps, probably some a little bit of teres in there as well. Definitely some rear delts, but I think that it's going to be dominated by like the traps, the mid traps, and the rhomboid structures. So what the N1 guys have shown is that the natural path for the rear delts is actually going to be slightly down and out. So instead of going directly out, like where your arm would form a T at the top of the rep, it's more like elbows tucked 30 to 50 degrees or something along those lines, depending on your structure. And then the rear delts are scapular retractors. So you wouldn't want to say you're training your rear delts unless you're actually pulling as far as you can given your range of motion. Of course, the mid traps are also scapular retractors. So you are going to also train some mid traps. It's not to say that, by performing it this way, it's just rear delts, and the other way is just mid traps. Like there's going to be variable levels of each with both variations. But I think the more that you can do your rear delt focused movements with your arms coming slightly down is going to be more beneficial for that structure. And then so with that in mind, I think that some of the best rear delt exercises you can do are exercises that people commonly think of as back exercises. So I think like a dumbbell row, like a typical dumbbell row, if you don't row into your waistline and you don't really let that dumbbell kind of scrape up along your body, but you kind of let those elbows pop out a little bit, that is probably one of the best movements you can do for the rear delts with free weights. And then that can be emulated across a ton of different rowing variations. Like you can do like a chest supported row that way, a seal row, a one arm row. You can do a barbell row if you want to. I mean, I think the rear delts, they do react pretty well to being pronated, whereas the lats really want you to be in like a neutral grip. But I think the rear delts might even respond better to like a mixed grip. So it's like, what I mean by mixed is it's not fully pronated and it's not fully neutral. It's almost like the same path that your elbow would take as it goes in, right? So it lines up perfectly with the movement pattern that you're trying to implement. So like my T-bar row machine at home has those handles that aren't fully pronated and they're not fully neutral. They're like 45-degree handles, and those just rip me apart. They're so good. So if you can either use D handles, like cable handles that move, or if you have any like angles grips or anything like that where you can change like a fully pronated position to a slightly pronated position, I think that also helps the cause.
So
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so what I think is really interesting is I have what are my favorite rear delt exercise now, and I feel like it's going to change once Cass and then one team show me, what I don't know in a couple days. But I always like training them with a cable, and what I have found, what works best for me, because it's one of those muscles that it's a small muscle surrounded by like massive other muscles. I like to train them unilaterally, so like one hand at a time, so that I can focus more on one place instead of trying to do both at the same time, right? And my favorite way to train them is actually with a cable stack kind of bent over. Like let's say, for example, you would be doing maybe like a tricep kickback with a cable.
Oh, is it coming across your body?
No, but straight on. Okay. But then you keep your elbow kind of fixed and you're just like rowing back. But what's nice is you can back up a little bit and get that. You can get that big stretch in front of you. Yeah. So you can load it a little bit in that lengthened position and then come all the way, back. And it's going to get a little bit of like, like the teres there as well. But that's by far my favorite. And you get a little bit of tricep as well because you're obviously moving that, but I don't like my arm completely locked out, but I don't want it super bent, but just like a break in the elbow. So, but I love doing them that way.
Dude, you should try it coming across your body. So set up in that same position, but pull the one on where the right hand is across with the left hand. Mm-hmm. Just even like in my mind, as I like think about that, I can already feel the tension.
Yeah, so I think that is the best way that I have found, because it's simple, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of them they're complex, and you're moving around some other structure, like the reverse pec deck fly, which is like the common way most people will train them, right? You're confined to other structures that are, maybe don't fit you the best, and that's where the cable's just going to be fantastic because I'm going to move a little bit to the left, I'm going to move a little bit to the right, I'm going to try my a neutral grip, I'm going to try the D handle. Like you can just modify it to what you can find
to fit perfectly.
fits well. Yeah.
No, I love that. That's great. I mean, anytime you can use a cable for a structure like that, that's going to be hugely advantageous. I had a question the other day on, it was either Instagram or in our Facebook group. Someone asked me about face pulls and whether they're good for rear delts. And so I think that given what we know now about the elbow path for the rear delts, I think that well, and I would say that I felt this before too, but I'm more confident of it now. I always felt like a face pull to me was more of a lateral delt focus because the elbows are coming up almost like they do in a Y raise. So anytime you have to raise that arm up like that, you're going to get a lot of lateral delt in there. And whenever I teach the face pull, I always teach that the elbows stay higher than the hands. So for that reason, I think that it's more of a lateral delt focus. Whereas if you were to do a face pull that was more into like the neckline where the elbows could travel a little bit further down and the hands maybe finish above the elbows, I think at that point, some people still call that a face pull. I would call that like a row. Probably call it a high row or something. But people might call that a face pull, and that would be a good rear delt exercise. Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to add on that.
Maybe we'll have a follow-up in 2 to 3 weeks once we're both through the practical, and we'll have a whole new world of things to talk about with the rear delts.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We will see.
Cool. Yeah, very cool. We had just a real quick question. Do you want to kick this around?
Sure.
All right, cool. So question on an Instagram came to me, and I just thought it was an interesting idea to kind of throw out some of our theoretical or anecdotal ideas on it. So the question was, what are your thoughts on the benefits of isolation movements for beginners as a means to connect mind to muscle? Or are they just better off working on compound movements for body awareness and strength?
This one's hard, and I don't feel strongly in either direction. Personally, I feel like if you go down the path of, it could be a slippery slope is what I'm kind of getting at with the isolation movements, because you might end up placing too much emphasis on them based on your novice status, and then you potentially it's what's the word I'm looking for, the opportunity cost. But I was thinking like the opportunity cost of that time and energy that you could be spent learning how to brace properly, move through the compounds with, positions type of thing. So I don't know how much benefit there is to that mind-muscle connection on an isolation in the very, very beginning, because it is something that you will slowly kind of build over time.
Yeah, I think you said that really well. I think in my mind there are pros and cons to doing that. I also question, and I haven't worked with a beginner in a really long time, so if anyone is relatively novice, feel free to shoot me a DM and let me know. But I wonder whether making that mind-muscle connection through an isolation movement is even like going to be super strong in the beginning. I feel like, I feel like you're just going to be learning how to move. Like, regardless of whether you're doing an isolation movement or a compound movement, you're going to be creating neural adaptations to said movement. And I just don't know that matters. Like, if it's isolation or compound, you're still just going to be learning. So I'm not sure that you're going to have the bandwidth in your brain and nervous system to make a mind-muscle connection that is meaningful at that point. So I lend myself more to just saying, get the most bang for your buck. Like, you're a newbie. If you want to do isolations instead of doing squats, for example, you would have to do leg extensions, glute kickbacks, potentially like some sort of adductor work. There would be maybe even calves. Like, the squat, literally, when you're a beginner, it will hypertrophy your calves because you're standing under load with weight. You're not doing a calf raise with it. You're just standing with weight. So it seems like a massive waste of your time and energy to go and have to do all of these different movements instead of just doing one movement that's going to help you build all of these capabilities that benefit you going forward.
Yeah, and you're kind of just kicking the can down the road because you're going to need to learn how to squat eventually anyway.
Right. Right.
I mean, obviously some things, you know, like there isn't that much, like some of the simpler body parts, like a bicep, right? Okay, you can do like a barbell bicep curl. I mean, that's kind of in isolation still anyway, because of just the simplicity of the joint, really.
Yep. It's a single joint movement.
Yeah, single joint movement, exactly. But I'm just not, I don't feel very strongly that you can even really create that much of a mind to muscle connection in the beginning, because I think like those like neural adaptations, or maybe I don't even know. I just feel like you're missing the components that need to be there for that to happen.
Yeah.
I do have a really funny story about that, actually, that I just remembered from when I was younger. When I first got into like lifting weights and stuff, I don't know, I'm like, 14, 15 years old. I really wanted to be able to like make my chest move, you know, how you can just like flex it.
Bounce the pecs.
You can bounce the pecs. And my stepdad could do it. And like he, lifted in like high school and college, but he didn't touch a weight for probably 2 decades at this point. And he could still do it. And I was like, how? Like, teach me how. I want to be able to do that. And he's like, one day you can just do it. And like, I totally didn't buy it. And I'm like, he just doesn't want to fucking teach me. And then I shit you not, like a year later, 2 years later, I don't remember, like one day I could just do it. And I was like, holy shit, it happened. Like he wasn't lying to me. And I have no idea how, but it was like one day I could like that connection to how to move them, like was literally just there, which is like, could be me just not remembering right or whatever. But that's how I remember it. It's like one day I could just bounce my pecs after not being able to for my entire life.
Had you been training prior to the time that you asked him to teach you?
I was probably like right when I started, maybe a month or two or something.
So I'm wondering how much of that has to do with like the ability to connect to the muscle, but also having enough muscle there to bounce. Because maybe you just didn't have any muscle before, and you're like, how am I supposed to contract something that isn't there? You know?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I meant with like the mind muscle connection. Like, how do you connect to like, I don't know, like I mean, obviously everyone has musculature there, but it's like you have like your basic human function musculature. Right. But yeah, especially for something like a back or whatever, like how maybe it's harder to create that connection because like you barely have any there. You have like your minimum buy-in to be a human type of muscle type of deal.
I mean, it takes people a decade sometimes or longer to learn how to connect to their lats. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, yeah, it's wild. I mean, the amount of people that have no clue what they're actually training with their back and they're actually still arm pulling 10 years into training, I see it all the time. So yeah, I think that the mirror muscles are definitely easier to contract. I mean, I haven't practiced posing because I don't know, I can't get myself to do it, but I cannot figure out how to contract my hamstring, like without weight. Like I can do it with weight and pull my leg up, and I can do a leg curl and contract it, but I can't figure out how to fully activate it without stressing the rest of my body when I'm just standing there. So, things that you just have to practice and learn over time.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all I got, man.
Yeah, same. So, I mean, it was a pretty cool episode, covered some different things with us. Obviously, the rear delt conversation, which I want to revisit once we know more, because I feel like we may have new answers.
Yeah.
Or I feel like Cass or someone at the end wants to be like, yeah, Aaron, that movement's fucking stupid. Let's do this
why
instead.
would you do that one-arm cable row thing?
Yeah. So
just do a pull down.
Yeah, so I feel like there may be some of that, and then I do definitely want to update the listeners as I learn more. But yeah, Bryan and I will catch you guys next week.